Care package inbound.
We as caregivers, we flat out don't have healthy boundaries. We don't even know what healthy boundaries are. And it gets us into a mess sometimes because we tend to become, codependent without even realizing it and not meaning to. And the way that we become codependent is whenever we forget where we end and where our partner begins. Or we don't stand up for ourselves and we get walked all over and we feel like we are not appreciated and taken advantage of a lot of times. Either they are invading our boundaries or we are invading theirs. Think of boundaries as these invisible circles around us. And in these circles, there are likes, our wants, our needs, how we want to be treated, pretty much what we will tolerate and what we won't tolerate. So the problem becomes when, our invisible boundary gets broken and people get into our space and we've allowed them in there. It's very hard to get them out, and it's very hard for us to get out of their space when that boundary has been broken. So you have to go to work on reestablishing boundaries. And to do that, let's start with if someone is invading your boundaries first. I have a general rule: no name calling. Okay, so anytime I'm called, let's say, a bitch, I have to inform my husband, do you realize that you just called me a bitch? I mean, my general rule is you can say I'm acting like a bitch, but don't call me a bitch. So the first thing I have to do is inform him, do you realize that you just called me a bitch? And then I have to ask them, please do not call me that name. And then I tell them, you may not call me that name. And the consequence is if you call me names again, I will leave this house for an hour. And then I follow through. If you don't follow through on what you're going to say, it does no good because it will not establish a boundary. If you want to be treated right, you have to let people know how you will tolerate being treated. But what if you're invading their personal space? You have to break these patterns by telling yourself and really believing that other people are capable of doing things on their own. They may need help, yes, but you don't have to do it for them. If you're keeping quiet, just to keep the peace, you have a right to speak. You're not doing them any favors by, not rocking the boat out of fear that they will leave. You have to realize that your self-worth and self-value is not dependent on the other person. If you have this need to be needed, okay, that's for you. You've got to figure that out and work on that. Because if your whole life revolves around that person, if you live for that person, if you are dependent on them being sick to need you, okay, that is the definition of codependence, and so many caretakers get into that. And I think that, we get into this because we forget the only person that you can change is you. The only person you have any control over is yourself. No one else can make you happy. You cannot make someone else do anything that they don't choose to do. But you spin that around, and the only way that someone can make you feel something or control you is if you let them. There has to be respect in a relationship, and there has to be healthy boundaries. And the sooner you start realizing the unhealthy patterns in your relationship, in your own life, the sooner you can start correcting those. And you need to correct those because you are your own person. You have wants and needs. They are their own person. The only way that relationships work is when there is a team we, when both sides respect each other. There can be understanding, there can be empathy, there can be compassion. But there has to be somewhere where that line is drawn that you say no more. And it is not wrong to say this is enough. It's how you go about doing it is where the problem comes in a lot of times. But I think we get into that point where we don't say things correctly because we react out of anger, out of fear, and sometimes just flat out exhaustion because we're just not taking care of ourselves. We practice zero self-care.